Howdy, and welcome to Wise About Texas, the Texas History Podcast. This is your host, Ken Wise. Thanks so much for tuning in today for a very special episode. I want to start this day off with a number. That number is 11. This podcast is almost 11 years old. 11 years of me sitting with this microphone telling you stories about the state, and 11 years of you listening, which I appreciate, emailing me, sending me the stories that you love about Texas history, many of which I probably never would have found without you. And I don't take any of that for granted. And because of you, this thing has grown into something bigger than I ever could have imagined, and certainly bigger than I planned. So I want to tell you today about where it's going to grow next. And then I'm going to show you exactly what's going on. I've started a new podcast. It's called Wise About Golf. And it's the Texas Golf History Podcast. It's a subsidiary, really, of this podcast. Now, before you reach for that skip button, hang on one second, because I know there's some of you out there who are thinking, well, I'm here for the Republic of Texas, the Comanches, the courthouse squares, the cattle trails. I'm not here for golf. I totally understand that. And I'm not going to spend this episode selling you on golf. But I'm going to make one argument to you, and here it is. Golf is not a break from Texas history. It's actually a way into it. Golf came to Texas in the 1880s when Texas was still largely a frontier state. That's before Spindletop, before cars. There were people walking around when golf came to Texas that could still remember the Battle of San Jacinto. And it kept surprising me every time I looked into some Texas golf history, how I would end up in some other Texas history story, at an army post, a port, a railroad, the 1900 storm, because that's what golf was in Texas. It didn't come here on its own. It came attached to the people and institutions that were building this state. And if you study Texas golf history, like so many other aspects of Texas history, you are involved in Texas history. As an example, the earliest account of golf in Texas that I was able to find was written in 1887 by a clergyman educated at Trinity College in Dublin, who was playing golf on the parade ground of the Army post that became Fort Sam Houston. Incidentally, he's also credited with inventing the modern St. Bernard dog breed. I'm not making that up. It's one of those Texas stories you just can't believe. And you'll hear all about him in a few minutes. And that's the kind of thing that I was turning up. And based on your feedback, I knew that we needed another show just focused on golf history. Now, don't worry. Wise About Texas is not going anywhere. This is the main show. It always will be. I'm not winding it down and moving on in any respect. Wise About Golf is a separate podcast. It's got its own feed, its own website, its own everything. But if you have even just a mild interest in the game, and certainly if you play golf at all, you're going to want to check that podcast out. Now, every so often, one of those episodes is going to sit squarely in the middle of what we already do here on Wise About Texas. So not so much a golf episode with Texas in it, but a Texas history episode that may involve the game of golf. I can't wait to see what we're going to discover together. And if that does occur, I'm going to put it on both feeds. And I'm going to start right now. Right now, I'm going to give you episode 2 of Wise About Golf. It's the story of how, where, and when the first golf came to Texas. It came from Scotland to Charleston to a Dutch settlement in New York that actually banned the game in 1659, all the way to a pasture in Dallas and a parade ground in San Antonio. You don't need episode 1 to enjoy episode 2, and you certainly don't need to play golf. At the end of this episode, you'll hear a segment called The 19th Hole. That's the golf show's version of getting there that we do on this podcast, where the places are and how you can go see them. So give it a listen. Tell me what you think. The email for that show is golf@wiseabouttexas.com. Send me your episode ideas, interview ideas, the club whose history maybe was never even written down. Anything you think might be interesting for the podcast. The regular email address for the show, host@wiseabouttexas, hadn't changed, and I still want to hear from you there too. So let's get right to it. Here's episode 2 of Wise About Golf. Howdy, and welcome to Wise About Golf, the Texas Golf History Podcast. I'm your host, Ken Wise. Thanks for joining me today for episode 2 of the newest golf podcast on the internet. If you haven't already, go back and give a quick listen to episode 1 sometime. It's a brief introduction to this project. This is a subsidiary, if you will, of my Wise About Texas podcast, which has been running almost 11 years now. There'll be some overlap, probably both directions. Some of these golf pro episodes will fit within the larger themes of Texas history, and we'll be discussing some golf in the larger context of Texas history too. But for this episode, I wanted to give you an introduction to how and where and when golf first came to Texas. Now, we're going to dive deeper into the people and places I mentioned today. We're going to do that in subsequent episodes. But what I want to do today is just give you an overview of golf coming to America and golf coming to Texas. So let's head to the first tee and figure out how Texas golf got its start. We're going to go back to the 1800s and get wise about golf. Now, before we get to Texas, we got to talk a little bit about the origins of golf in America. Now, golf itself took shape on the coast of Scotland on the Links land. That's the land between sort of a sandy, raised, almost beach area with grass and different kinds of brush. And that was the land between the water and what was thought to be the usable land, and it was called the Links. And the shape of this land really shaped the game of golf in Scotland. It was played as early as the 14th century. It was popular enough in Scotland that King James actually banned it in 1457 because it was interfering with archery practice and other more useful pursuits. There's also an ordinance in America at Fort Orange, which later became Albany, New York. And this ordinance was drafted in 1659, and it banned the playing of golf, and it spelled it with a C. Now, there's a lot of discussion about golf being descendant from a Dutch game called Colvin, which I'm sure is a mispronunciation, that was hitting a ball with a stick. Studying it, though, you realize that the game of golf as we know it was really shaped by the Links land in Scotland. And so I think it's fair to say that the Scots invented the game that we know as golf, but that Fort Orange settlement, that was a Dutch settlement. So the Dutch were probably playing their version of it. And the balls or rocks or whatever they were hitting were flying around, risking the injury to the population. Windows were getting broken, etc. So once again, golf is interfering with more productive pursuits and was banned. And that was really the first reference to anything resembling golf that I could find in the United States. There's further evidence later in the 1700s of golf coming to South Carolina, specifically Charleston. Now, Charleston was a major port in South Carolina in the 1700s, and there's a well-documented event in 1743 when a ship called the Magdalen arrived, and it carried among its cargo 96 golf clubs and 432 golf balls. They were shipped from Leith in Scotland. Leith is up the coast from Edinburgh, and there was a merchant in Charleston named David Dees, and he was born in Leith. So he would have played the Leith Links, which was a 5-hole golf course, and the place where the first formal rules of golf would be written. So fair to say that Mr. Dees brought golf to Charleston. But wait, recently, a new document was discovered by Dr. David Dobson at the University of St. Andrews, and that document shows that golf clubs were exported from Scotland 4 years earlier. In June of 1739, it was aboard a ship called the Carolina, and it was headed to Charleston, and the clubs were shipped to William Wallace, who indeed was a merchant in Charleston at that time. So I think we can say that golf was being played in Charleston as early as 1739. There were references in an almanac to golf clubs in South Carolina in 1786. There's references in 1791 to the South Carolina Golf Club celebrating an anniversary dinner. In 1795, there's a reference to the Savannah Golf Club in Georgia. So golf was definitely being played, but those clubs apparently did not survive because we don't have a lot of further information, although if you're listening to this and you know more about it, please get in touch. We then fast forward to the 1880s, where we find references to golf in Florida, in West Virginia, but it was New York where golf really took off. There was a Scotsman named John Reed, and he had a friend, Robert Lockhart, who was headed back to Scotland on business, so he asked Lockhart to bring some clubs and balls back, which he did, and Lockhart is said to have hit some of those golf balls on the frozen Hudson River during the winter before he delivered them to Reed, but eventually in 1888, in February, they just couldn't wait any longer. They couldn't wait till spring. So Reed got some friends together and they laid out 3 holes across from Reed's house and started to play golf. And when they played there, they would hang their coats and their lunch baskets and a jug of some unnamed refreshment, although being golfers, you can guess that it was somewhat potent. And people would call them the Apple Tree Gang when they would gather and play golf. And then in November of that year, 1888, they formally organized a club. They named it after the home of golf, St. Andrews in Scotland, called it St. Andrews Golf Club. And it moved around a few times and is currently in a place called Hastings-on-Hudson, New York. And we consider St. Andrews the first golf club in America. Now, it wasn't technically the first golf club, but it's the first one that lasted. So what about Texas? Well, the importance of St. Andrews being the first club formed in 1888 that lasted is that it signified that golf had really taken hold in America. A year before they founded the St. Andrews Golf Club, in 1887, there was a gentleman named Cumming McDonough who was in Texas. Now, McDonough's an interesting guy. And by the way, for future reference, one of the things I love to do on my history podcasting is dive a little bit deeper into people that come up during the episode so you have a little bit of the side stories and some real context to the events we're discussing. So let me tell you a little bit about Cumming McDonough. The McDonough family had connections in both England and Ireland. And Cumming, his full name was John Cumming McDonough. He went to college at Trinity College in Dublin. He was ordained in the Church of England. And he was an enthusiastic dog breeder. Now, why do I mention that? Well, he is credited with being the father of the modern St. Bernard dog breed. He cleaned up the St. Bernards that came from the mainland, and he's credited with creating the modern breed of St. Bernard. Now, the English were very interested in Texas, even going back to the Texas Revolution. England was very interested in Texas, and the McDonough family actually owned some land in Bexar County near San Antonio. In fact, there's an unincorporated community known as McDonough, Texas, still in Bexar County, southwest of San Antonio. That was a stop on the Southern Pacific that was on the McDonough land, so they called it McDonough. They called that stop McDonough. That was 1881 or so, when the Southern Pacific came through. But the point is, Cumming McDonough lived there for a while. And on February 20th, 1887, there's an article in the San Antonio Daily Express written by Cumming McDonough describing the game of golf. So let me tell you about this article. McDonough writes that many readers of the newspaper wanted him to talk about what he called the Scotch game of golf, because he had been playing it, and he describes himself as playing it I'm going to quote this article, in the open air on the parade ground at the government post. Now, what he's talking about is Fort Sam Houston. It wasn't named Fort Sam Houston at the time. That wasn't until, I think, 1890. Don't hold me to that. But that's where Cumming McDonough, was playing golf. He describes the game as very popular around the world, and it's pretty funny how he describes how the game is played. So I'm going to quote the article again. He writes, "The game is played with clubs like hockey or polo sticks." Not that anyone in San Antonio in the 1880s would know what a hockey stick was, but anyway, that's what he said. And he described clubs as much more finely made than either of those things. He goes on to say, quote, "A little white ball about the size of an egg made of vulcanite or gutta percha." So those are the first rubber golf balls. And he says the ball is placed on a small rise in the ground called, quote, in golf parlance, the tee, close quote. So, of course, they didn't have golf tees yet, so they were just hitting it off a mound of sand or dirt. And this is a part I love. He's describing a properly struck golf shot, and he says if you manage to strike the ball properly, you, quote, drive the ball off into space with a click that sounds most delicious to the ear, and as you see the little sky pilot like Dulnig's cistern high up in heaven, you feel it to be the proudest moment of your life, close quote. That definitely describes the feeling on the odd occasion I flush it on the golf course. He goes on to describe the social aspects of golf, the fact that it's good exercise and you can play it all your life, all the things we still think about golf today. And then at the very end, he says that the officers at the post, at the fort, have allowed golf to be played on the parade ground. So that's the earliest mention of golf in Texas. And our clergyman, Mr. McDonough, would eventually return to England, become a lawyer, and serve in the Parliament. So the people of San Antonio, at least we know, were introduced to the game then in 1887. A note on that early St. Andrews Golf Club in New York, along with 4 other clubs in the Northeast, Newport Country Club, the Country Club in Brookline, Massachusetts, Shinnecock Hills Golf Club, and Chicago Golf Club in Illinois. That was considered pretty far west at the time. Those 5 clubs got together shortly after the period we were just discussing in 1894 and formed the United States Golf Association, and those are considered the founding 5 clubs. So golf had really taken off in the United States. In 1895, the USGA put on the first U.S. Amateur. They put on the first U.S. Open that year, as well as the first U.S. Women's Amateur. So golf was getting popular in the United States. What about Texas? Well, right about that time, we have one of the earliest notes of golf being played in Texas, and that was in Dallas. In 1896, some guys got together and sort of set up a rough-looking course, and we think it was at the corner of Lemon Avenue and Oaklawn Avenue. Those guys are recorded as being Henry Lee Edwards from Wales, who was a cotton merchant, Richard Potter, and Courtney Wellesley. They had a company called the Texas Land and Mortgage Company of London Limited. Now, Texas was really expanding during this time. In fact, West Texas had started to be open to settlement. So there was a lot of English capital coming into Texas in the late 1800s. So Edwards was from Wales, Potter was from England, and Wellesley was from Ireland. I'm going to call Edwards the more serious golfer because he ended up founding the Texas Golf Association, and the Texas State Amateur Trophy is the H.L. Edwards Memorial Trophy. But the other 2 guys were serious, certainly at the time. They sunk tin cans into the ground, barbed wired off the putting area. Not sure we could call it a green at the time, but they to keep the cows out, and they started playing golf. Their activity would eventually grow into the Dallas Country Club, and as I said earlier, that's going to be its own episode. But the Dallas Country Club wasn't organized until 1900. It was called the Dallas Golf and Country Club. Before then, we had our first chartered club in Texas, and that was in Galveston. Now, I should mention Dallas was a was a growing city there in the late 1800s, but Galveston was the largest city in the state of Texas. Galveston is the only natural deepwater port in Texas to this day, and it was the center of commerce in Texas from the time of the pirates in the 1700s. So it was a big city. They chartered a country club in 1898 with about 30 people. Now, again, this is going to get its own episode. In fact, it'll be shortly after this one. They laid out 9 holes. Now, what's interesting about this is the person that laid out the 9 holes was Mungo Park. Again, sorry to do this to you, but Mungo Park's going to get his own episode. For now, I'll just say he was a very famous Scottish golfer from a very famous Scottish golf family, the Parks of Musselburgh. He laid out the golf course and served as the professional for a short time. Unfortunately, the 1900 storm wiped out that course, but then it gets real interesting because they designed another course employing the famous Scotsman Donald Ross. But we're going to save that for the Galveston Country Club episode. Shortly after that, 1904, there was actually a competition between Galveston and the Houston Country Club. Now, Houston Country Club cites its chartered founding in 1908, but it existed in form before then. So not only were they playing in Galveston, they were also playing in Houston. In 1899, the state capital of Austin joined in, chartering the Austin Golf Club late in 1899. It was founded by Lewis Hancock, who would be a mayor of Austin. He was a bank president and a builder. 1904, we have the club organized in San Antonio that would become San Antonio Country Club. So what you can see is golf is absolutely exploding all over the country at this time and all over Texas. Really within just a few years of each other, all these golf clubs were formed. But they were all clubs, now very much in the British tradition of clubs. Now, it's tempting to think these days of country clubs as sort of this elite, private, exclusive thing, and that's certainly true at certain levels. But in the UK, that's not necessarily the case. People gather in clubs just as a form of social organization. It's not always the big exclusive thing that people sometimes think of. But nevertheless, golf was going to be a lot bigger than just any particular group of people. So golf was definitely going to become public, and did so in Texas in 1916 when the Brackenridge Park Golf Course in San Antonio was the first 18-hole municipal course in Texas. George Brackenridge had donated some of his hunting land to the city of San Antonio for Brackenridge Park. If you want to learn more about George Brackenridge, he was a fascinating guy. Go to episode 18 of Wise About Texas on your podcast platforms, and you'll learn more about that. Now, I mentioned Donald Ross earlier. Also, very famous golf course architect A.W. Tillinghast came to Texas and designed Brackenridge Park. I read at one point that in the 1920s, they estimated 150,000 rounds of golf a year were played at Brackenridge. Now, all my PGA friends listening to this are shuddering at the idea of 150,000 rounds on your golf course, but that's what it said. Something else about this time in Texas, a few years before Brackenridge in 1913, 2 very famous British golfers, Harry Vardon and Ted Ray, toured the United States. There's a great movie called The Greatest Game Ever Played, which was made after the book of the same name about the 1913 U.S. Open, which was during Vardon and Ray's tour. They played in it, and a young caddy named Francis Ouimet, this was at the country club in Brookline, Massachusetts, beat the great Vardon and Ray to win the U.S. Open. Wonderful book, wonderful movie, great story. Anyway, they're touring, and they came to Texas in the winter of 1913. So Texas golf was definitely on the map. Brackenridge, incidentally, hosted the first professional golf tournament in Texas, the Texas Open, which is still being played today, called the Valero Texas Open. That was 1922. And in true Texas fashion, they offered a purse almost 3 times that of the U.S. Open at the time. So as golf took off in America, it definitely took off in Texas. It's pretty amazing. In just a few short years, all those clubs were formed. The courses were being designed and built, and Texans were already competing in the greatest game ever invented. All right, in my main Wise About Texas podcast, I have a segment at the end called Getting There, where I tell you how to go see some of the places I discussed in the episode, and I'm going to do the same thing, but we're going to call it the 19th hole. So let's step into the 19th hole for something a little extra related to the subject of this episode. Now, I'm going to tell you where some of the locations of some of these courses were, and a couple still are. But this 19th hole in future episodes might be just a little bit extra something to get you thinking about the episode. So today, I mentioned that the 1896 golf in Dallas was played, we think, at Lemon and Oaklawn in Dallas. That's a little bit south of present-day Dallas Country Club, which is what that early activity evolved into. I didn't drive up there to look, but I looked on Google Maps, and it looks like we got a Verizon store and an office building at that corner today. Now, when you're reading all these old historical accounts, at the corner might mean near the corner. So I don't know for sure where it was played. Any listeners out there that know for sure where that 1896 activity occurred, please email me, golf@wiseabouttexas.com. There was another account by the Dallas Parks Board that talked about a golf course at Haskell and Keating, which would be down around the Cotton Bowl. I couldn't find much more about that, but and I'm not sure if they meant that it was supposed to be the same as the Lemon and Oaklawn activity, and we just don't know for sure where it was. But in any event, that's hanging out there. I mentioned Brackenridge Park Golf Course, which is still there in Brackenridge Park. So easy to find. They got a great old 1920s clubhouse that's definitely worth seeing. Again, more in the Brackenridge Park episode. The early Houston Country Club course is still there. It's now called Gus Wortham Golf Course. It's a municipal golf course in Houston on the southeast side. Galveston Country Club moved a few times, and the present Galveston Country Club's on the far west side of the island. But those early courses I'll describe in some detail in the upcoming Galveston Country Club episode. And then, of course, I mentioned Austin and Hancock Golf Course. The early Austin Country Club is on East 41st, 811 East 41st, and it's still there as a municipal golf course in the city of Austin. Well, that was episode 2 of Wise About Golf. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, the podcast app that you're listening to this show on, you can search Wise About Golf and follow it, and you'll get the rest of them as they come. Episode 3 was about Galveston Country Club, and I uncovered some very interesting golf history around that great place. We're going to talk about the first golf professional in Texas. We're going to talk about the first municipal golf course in Texas, and from there, it's wide open. You'll find a Wise About Golf Instagram page and Facebook page, and Wise About Golf TX on Twitter. So send me your ideas at golf@wiseabouttexas.com. And thank you for 11 great years. This podcast has never once been built in any respect by advertising. It's by you, and you listening and you telling someone else. I really appreciate that. Well, that wraps it up for this episode of Wise About Texas. Go out and do something for Texas today. And until next time, God bless Texas, and we'll see you down the road.